Hey guys, back again with another video, a review on The Legend of Heroes Cold Steel for PS3 and PlayStation Vita. And if you've been following my channel, it's no surprise that the Legend of Heroes series is not a series I enjoy a whole lot. Now, Trails in the Sky and the Legend of Heroes games are called like the Kaseki games. I think that's like the name for them, developed by Falcom. And The Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky came out like a long time ago. I think it came out in like 2004. And that game is well regarded in the JRPG community. Like, a lot of people think that game is like one of the greatest JRPGs ever made. I did an impressions video for the game a while back, and I did finish it, and I was fairly positive in my review, but it's one of those games that I think less of the more I think about it and look back on it. Like, I look back on that game and I realized that I really didn't enjoy a whole lot about it. And I played the second chapter, not too long ago, and if you'll remember that video, I did an impressions video on it, and I hated it. Like, I just did not care for it. I thought that game, the second chapter, was actually kind of disappointing coming from the first. In a few different ways. I'm not going to repeat what I said in that video. If you want my thoughts on that game, you can check out that video. It's on the channel. So, anyways, I've been hesitant to play Cold Steel, which I heard was quite good. And a lot of people, I've been singing this game's praises, especially the second game, which came out fairly recently, and is apparently a hell of a lot better than the first one. But I was hesitant. Now, I don't hate all Falcom games. I actually really love the Ys series. I love the combat in those games. Now, the story in those games, like the story and characters, are nowhere near as strong as like the Kaseki games. So it's always one of those things where I really wish that they had a game that combined the Ys combat with the Kaseki series, like writing and world building and characters. If they combined the best of both worlds and created a game like that, like it might end up being one of my favorite games of all time. But unfortunately, they haven't done something like that. They've got separate teams working on the Ys games as well as the Kaseki games. But The Legend of Heroes Cold Steel, I decided to give it a shot because I heard such good things about it, and especially the second game. And I finished it a while ago. This review is coming out a bit late. I finished the game weeks ago, but I just haven't had time to do a video on it just yet. And it took me a little over 60 hours to finish. This game is long as fuck. It's too long, and I'll get to that later. I thought this game was honestly a slog in the second half. By the time I hit like the 30-hour mark, I was honestly kind of sick of it, especially with regards to its gameplay, which is where a lot of my main issues come from, and this is the same thing with The Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky. But this game does have some improvements over that game. I do think I prefer this over Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky, and I'm interested to see what's going to happen in the second game, because like with Trails in the Sky, this game has quite the cliffhanger ending. It has like an action-packed ending with all like these different events happening, all these really well done plot twists, and it's actually handled even better than Trails in the Sky, I think. And so I'm interested to see how this continues off. But I don't know, this game overall, I have a lot of problems with it. I don't hate Cold Steel. I think it's just merely decent. Maybe leaning towards mediocre in some aspects. And I'm certainly not like itching to play the second one right away, just because I don't know, I've heard the battle system is quite a bit better in Cold Steel 2, but I just can't handle more of this type of game right now, especially since it's like another 60 hours for Cold Steel 2. But, I've heard that game is like one of the best games of 2016, but unfortunately I'm not going to get to it till at least next year sometime. But Cold Steel, let's talk about Cold Steel. Okay, so first let's talk about like the story and characters, because this is the highlight for of the game for me. Now, your character is named Reen, and he joins like this military academy called Thor's Military Academy, and this game takes place in Erebonia, a different area than Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky. And before I go too far into this, I will say there's no spoilers for this, so you don't have to worry about that. One thing that's interesting with this game is that if you've played Trails in the Sky, there's a lot of references to events that happened in those games, and there's even some characters that appear in this game from that game. Now, you don't have to play Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky to like make the most of out of this game. Like, you can jump right into Cold Steel, but it is interesting to see, and you're going to get more out of it, I think, if you do play Trails in the Sky first. A lot of like the things they referenced, I thought were actually kind of neat. And the way this game and Trails into the Sky, for that matter, handle world building is really special. Actually, they go above and beyond more than a lot of the JRPGs do. Like, this world feels like this actual world with actual actual siding, like different factions and people and ways of life and things like that. It's really well done. But it's a slow burn. These games really take their time, and the pacing is, again, one of my biggest issues with this game. The way the game is structured, which I'll get to that later. It's just the pacing is very slow. Like, a bunch of things will happen at once, and it's great, and it's really crazy, and then the game will just start getting slow again, and then you just kind of go through a lot of tedious, busy work before something crazy happens again. So anyways, this game takes place in the Thor Military Academy, and you're basically a part of this class called Class 7, and it's different from the other classes in this academy where they don't actually segregate nobles and commoners. And that kind of plays into the world and then the story later, and that's actually one of my favorite themes that this game has, the divide between nobles and commoners, and it's always brought up in this game. And your classmates, some of them are commoners, some of them are nobles, and it's very interesting meeting your different classmates and getting to know them and getting their backstories. And while it certainly takes its time building these characters, by the end of the game you really know and love these characters. There's only one character that I didn't like, and even then, towards the end, she grew on me a little bit. The character I don't like, what was her name again? I forget what, Millennia, I think. Milena, but she's basically the child character, the really annoying, shrill child character that's just always in your face and childish and just like, ugh, she is fucking annoying. But the rest of the characters are all really like fantastic characters. Now, this game takes a lot of influence from Persona 3 and 4 because you do have like the school life thing going on. And I guess I'll talk about the structure with this game. Now, the story in this game is quite political. There's a lot of like political intrigue, and you're getting to know all like the different different kings and things like that, and all like the characters and like the noble factions, and a lot of the classmates' parents are like really important figures within Erebonia. But there's kind of like a story going on the side, like on the side of all this school life stuff. I don't really want to talk about it too much because it would lead into spoilers. But it's slow to get going. The actual story in this game doesn't really pick up until like chapter 4 or 5 out of like, I think there's like 7 chapters in this game, and it's not until like the last hour or two where the story really kicks into high gear. So I think that's going to be better in the second game, where there's actually going to be a story, because in this game, a lot of your time is spent visiting different parts of the world and doing basically tedious, busy work for townspeople. One of the things you're doing within this Class 7 are these field studies, where you go to a different town and then you take on a list of tasks, and you usually have 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 days to complete all these different tasks. Some are optional, and they're kind of like your side quests that will get you hit different kind of bonuses and things and items for like your characters, for instance. But there's required tasks, and a lot of these are just going to be fetch quests or hunts. Most of them are these kind of things, or maybe like finding something for a character, like finding a lost cat or something. So a lot of these field studies, while it's cool that you see a lot, like you see more of the world, you get to understand this world and the people in it and the different towns that you'll come across, it's annoying in terms of pacing as well, because you're doing all this busy work that just kind of makes the game become a slog at certain points. So these field studies, I kind of grew to like and hate them at the same time, if that makes any sense. But yeah, like I was saying, Persona 3 and 4 is a big influence for this game because there's a school life part of this game, and there's like kind of like a schedule. It's not as I don't want to say it's not like as rigid maybe as like Persona 3 or 4. Like you have infinite time, but there's basically parts where you'll be walking around the academy and you can talk to your classmates and spend time with them and build up social links. Yeah, social links are actually in this game. Now, they're not as in-depth as Persona 3 and 4. Like, romantic relationships aren't really a part of this game, at least in the first part, like Cold Steel 1. I've heard Cold Steel 2 builds on this, and builds on the social links in some interesting ways. But it's not, like, it's not as involved as a process as, say, in Persona 3 and 4. And these little events that you have with characters, there's no voice acting to them, and they're not as lengthy as they are in Persona 3 and 4. But they do provide benefits within like the battle system and the gameplay, and it actually was one of my favorite parts. Just wandering around the school, visiting the different clubs, and you know, getting to know your classmates better and spending like your social link points within this like school life portion. So the structure of the game, like each chapter kind of plays out similarly, where you'll start off with the school life stuff. You'll use your social links. You might do a few quests around the school grounds. And then you'll move on to your field study, where you get grouped up with certain party members. And then you'll get to the new town, you'll meet the people there, you'll do a couple days worth of side quests, like I said, busy, like tedious, like, you know, annoying, not fun quests for the most part. And then towards the end of the field study, like a certain story event will happen. And you'll have to take care of like a conflict or a problem within that town that you're in. And then you'll move on to the next chapter. You might have like a school exam. There's some like written exams as well as practical exams, which are like combat-oriented exams. And then you'll move on to the next chapter, and you'll do it all over again. So yeah, it's in terms of pacing, it gets a little old at a certain point. It's not one of those games where I could play for extended sessions. Like eventually it started to get to me after a while. And I could only play in like maybe 3 to 5 hour sessions, which is why it actually took me a while to get through this game, honestly. But yeah, that's the structure of the game. The characters, I really did love the characters. I think they're like fantastic. And again, the way they build these characters is quite good. The writing is pretty strong. There's some humor to this game that I thought worked really well, but at the same time, it has like a serious tone. A lot of the time, which is good. I like that. So, yeah, the actual story doesn't get really all that interesting until the ending, but the characters and the writing generally kind of elevate the experience as a whole. But now, moving into gameplay, this is where a lot of my issues come in. So first, we'll talk about like the battle system. It's virtually unchanged from The Legend of Heroes: Trails in the Sky. Even though this game came out way later, it's pretty much the exact same battle system, where it's turn-based, kind of grid-based, but not really. You don't actually see a grid in this game, and it is 3D compared to the 2D visuals of Trails in the Sky. So you actually get to see your characters within the environment. But it is your kind of classic turn-based battle system. You have like a turn order. You kind of interrupt turns by using certain attacks. You have CP, which are like craft points, which again, those craft points get raised anytime you take damage or deal damage. And then you can do like these kind of burst attacks if you get like 100 CP, and they're strengthened if you can boost it up to 200. And each character has their own different crafts that they can use that use different amounts of CP. Each character has their own different weapon type, which is kind of like what separates the different characters. For instance, one character can have a bow, so you can actually attack from a farther range than other characters. Some characters have like these staffs where you can actually attack 2 enemies at once if they're right beside each other. You can move around on the battlefield, so if you can't reach a certain enemy, you can, instead of attacking a nearby enemy, you can use move to kind of get closer to that enemy. And you'll have to take that into account sometimes, because there's a lot of different like radius attacks, and you'll see on the turn order if an enemy is using an art, which are kind of like the magic attacks in this game, and it's going to take up a certain radius. You can actually use move to get out of the way of that attack, so it will actually miss. And you can interrupt enemy arts, so it's actually good to always look at the turn order and take advantage of that. Different bonuses will happen on different turns, like you'll see at one turn, maybe a character might get HP plus 500 or something like that. And all of this stuff was in Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky. It's still got the Sepith quartz system, where characters have like a kind of like a quartz grid of sorts, where you attach like these items called quartz into this grid. There's different, they correspond to different elements. And you'll put them in, and then you'll like basically give characters different skills, whether you want to give them some healing skills or like fire skills, and you can only put certain ones in certain slots. And you'll get Sepith, this stuff called Sepith from fighting enemies, where you can kind of unlock more slots for your characters or buy new skills that you can equip on your characters. So there's definitely some customization there with your characters, but I don't know, I just never found it all that enjoyable to mess with this quartz system. And it was the same thing with Trails in the Sky. But it's one of those things that, honestly, I kind of find hard to explain why it just doesn't do it for me, this quartz system. But I don't know, it just, for whatever reason, it just doesn't. It's just not my thing. I kind of wish this game had a different customization system. I mean, I think this is just a preference thing. I mean, I'm not saying this is like a terrible system, but I can't say it was ever all that exciting for me. Other than that, like, the battle system is, honestly, it's very slow. It's very slow. A lot of the battles, you're fighting like 6 to 10 enemies at once, and they just take forever. There's a lot of cool like special attacks you can use that are really well animated, but I don't know. And you can skip a lot of like the different huge animations, but it just always felt slow to me. And this game has the same issue that the Legend of Heroes games, or the Trails in the Sky games, had. And that's the damage sponge bosses. Like, every single boss in this game is just an insane damage sponge that takes forever to kill. And it just started to grate. It started to get on my nerves eventually. Now, the game does luckily have this system where if you die, you can retry while weakening the enemies. But unfortunately, you have to die. And this game, in the beginning, I found it actually sort of challenging. I was actually dying, like, not a decent amount, but I was actually, finding it fairly difficult. But by the time I got to, like, the 10-hour mark, it started to ease up. And the more, like, link attacks I would get, which that's a new thing with the battle system, which I'll explain soon here. But eventually the game did become easy. But, like, I wouldn't die. Like, my characters wouldn't die. It would just take forever to kill the bosses. So, yeah, that got really annoying, and the bosses just get more and more spongy as the game goes on. And then towards the ending, I was just getting so annoyed with the game that I would actually purposely, like, when I would see how much health a boss would have, I would just be like, okay, fuck this. I'm just going to try to kill myself and weaken him so it doesn't take for 30 minutes to kill a boss. But, like, that shit just, you guys know me. Like, damage sponges are one of my biggest pet peeves in games. And, like, I swear Falcom's games are so, like, filled with this kind of shit. It's like, that's how they figure, like, difficulty, like what difficulty is just like bosses taking forever to kill. And it just, I don't know, it's just annoying, and it made the battles just become a slog, especially like towards the end of the game. And you can see the enemies on the map in the dungeons, and you can kind of get advantages like a lot of JRPGs. But anytime I would run into a battle and there was like 6 to 8 enemies, and I didn't have one of my craft abilities that like are really good at taking care of a lot of enemies at once, I would just run away. I would run away because it would be just like, okay, well, this battle is going to take 20 minutes. What's the point? I might as well just run away. So I ran away from a lot of battles in this game if there was like fucking like 6 or 7 enemies, and I had no quick way of taking them all out. So honestly, that was really annoying. But yeah, battle system pretty much identical to Trails in the Sky. The only real difference is like the link attacks, where, like I was saying before, the social links will kind of like add up. So if you have a certain character you like, for instance, we'll use it as an example, like Laura, and you can like social link with her in battle, so you kind of link them together, and then they can have different kind of attacks. So one character can attack a certain enemy and like take advantage of their weakness, and then a chain attack will happen, where the other character you're linked with will attack. And this link system kind of builds throughout the game. You'll get different abilities for it. Eventually, way later in the game, you'll get kind of like an all-out attack where all your party members will attack all the enemies. Like, that came way late to me, because that's like a really useful ability, and unfortunately they give it to you like, what, I think like 45 to 50 hours into the game, which is just ridiculous. But yeah, this link system I do like, because again, I love the fact that you can have these social links outside of battle, like within the school life, and how it benefits your actual gameplay. And a lot of these link attacks, like the level 4 link attacks, are like quite overpowered. So that was enjoyable, and I liked kind of like linking certain characters together. So that I do like. I do like how they added that to the game. And there is one thing that I don't really want to spoil towards the end of the game that changes up the battle system, which I like. But overall, I just wish the game was like, had more to it compared to the Trails in the Sky. It's just kind of disappointing to me that this game, the move to 3D and years later, and yet they use the exact same battle system, and to me it's just as slow and honestly kind of dull as in the first game, and it's got the exact same character customization system. Now the game also has the same terrible dungeons that Trails in the Sky has. Like, these dungeons are just basically a bunch of different corridors. They're sort of maze-like, but not really. They're actually not too bad in terms of being like mazes. But they're so straightforward and filled with like these brain-dead puzzles, and everything looks the same. And that's actually how I got lost. I didn't get lost too often, but I did get lost sometimes. And it was mostly because all the hallways looked the same. Like, it just, I don't know. The dungeons are just super bland. They're so uninteresting. Luckily, they're mercifully short. Actually, not too many of them are that long. But there is one dungeon that you have to keep coming back to in the school. It's kind of like this underground dungeon, like in this old schoolhouse. And by the time I reached like the 5th floor of this dungeon, I was getting really sick of it. Like, that to me like felt like filler at first, but it's not. I don't really want to spoil it, but it isn't actually filler. But it certainly felt like that for like a good portion of the game. But yeah, the dungeons I didn't care for. Outside of that, you're walking along like these trails like during your field studies, and they're not very interesting to look at either. And yeah, I gotta say, like, the gameplay overall in this game didn't do much for me. Most of the time it was just a slog, and I just wanted to get to like the school life parts and like the story parts, and get to see, like, I loved seeing the different towns, but anytime I would have to go and fight these monsters or like do a fetch quest and, you know, have like 3 to 4 hours straight of combat through like these really uninteresting dungeons, like, it just, I don't know, the game got to me and it was starting to get a little old. But so yeah, by the time I reached like the 30-hour mark in this game, I was so sick of it. I just wanted it to end. And it's one of those games that just refuses to end. It just keeps going and going and going, and it's just like, there were so many times where I was just like, fuck, end already. Like, I don't know. I gotta say, by the end of the game, I just didn't want to play it anymore. Like, my interest and enthusiasm with the game just completely drained. That said, I do still want to play the sequel, but there's just, I don't know, there's just issues with like the gameplay with this game, and the battle system is just not my thing. But moving on, I don't think there's too much else to say about the gameplay. Visuals, it's... I mean, I'm not gonna lie, the game is not a good-looking game. It's like, everything's like super blocky, the textures are really low res. The characters look pretty good, like, I like the character designs themselves, but yeah, you can tell the game doesn't have a particularly high budget. It's one of the uglier looking JRPGs I've seen on the PS3. Now, I think it might have been originally a Vita game, so maybe that's why. Someone correct me on that. But I can't say the game impressed me with its visuals. And like I said, the dungeons are super bland. The environments, for the most part, are pretty bland as well. But at the same time, it is just visuals. I've often said visuals to me are like the least important part of the game. Like, I don't, you know, it doesn't really bother me if a game has poor visuals. But I'll just call it how I see it. That's like, the visuals are generally not too good here. Now, things get better with the audio, though. There's quite a bit of voice acting, and all of it is top-notch. Like, I didn't find any of the voice acting to be lackluster. Now, the soundtrack is actually really good. I actually really liked it. I've heard mixed things on the soundtrack. Now, there are songs that I remember from Trails in the Sky. They do reuse some songs, but they're the kind of songs that aren't, like, amazing or anything, and a lot of them actually remind me of Persona 3 and 4, especially the songs that play during the school portions. Like, they're really upbeat and catchy and kind of pop-oriented, but without the vocals. And I actually really dug those tracks. I thought they were kind of like, they were fun to listen to. And there's a lot of more like traditional JRPG type tracks. The battle theme I didn't care for in this game. In fact, hardly any of the battle themes, actually. And, I mean, the music isn't as bombastic and, like, super hard rock as, like, the Ys soundtracks, but they're pleasant. The songs are pleasant to listen to. And there's actually not a whole lot of songs in this game, but the songs that are in the game, you hear them so often that eventually they kind of get stuck in your head. And I really did enjoy a lot of them. A lot of them really like fit the different environments you were exploring. And like by the end of the game, I was like, wow, you know what? I actually really like this soundtrack. I mean, it doesn't, set the world on fire or anything, but they're kind of memorable to me. And I really like the one song. I think this was in Trails in the Sky, but there's a certain song that plays during like these nighttime sequences where different events will happen at night. There's a song that plays during those sequences that I really like. Like, I think it's like a really fantastic song. But yeah, the soundtrack I was actually sort of surprised by. I wasn't expecting to like it all that much because Trails in the Sky, the soundtrack I thought was okay, but nothing really stuck to me other than like a few tracks. But this soundtrack, I really did enjoy it. That said, it's not amazing or anything. I do think the Ys games have better soundtracks. They're kind of more my style though. But I did like the soundtrack here. I thought it was much better than I was expecting it to be. So yeah, that's Trails of Cold Steel. I probably have sounded fairly negative on it because it was a slog with like the second half of the game, especially. But it did get better at the very end. It really ends strong. Like the ending into this game is spectacular, really, and it does make me interested in playing the second one. But I don't know, the battle system, the dungeons, the damage sponge bosses, and then just the general pacing of the game. They just all combine to make kind of like an unpleasant experience for a majority of the game. It's a 60-hour game, and like I said before, I do appreciate them taking their time to really build the world here, and the world building is top-notch. But, I don't know, I feel like they could have done it differently. I don't necessarily think they need this 60-hour experience and these long-ass field studies of all this tedious busy work to really build up the world and make you invested with like the story and characters. I really think they would be they can pull it off with like a 35 to 45 hour experience. It wouldn't be easy, but I think it can be done. I just don't see why these Trails games need to be as long as they are. And it's especially crazy because this is a two-part game. To get the full story, it ends off on a cliffhanger. You need to play the second game as well. The same thing with Trails in the Sky. But yeah, as far as recommending the game, do I recommend it? It's really tough to recommend, honestly. I've heard that you can jump into Cold Steel 2 as long as like you kind of like maybe watch like online like the ending of the game. But like one of the more enjoyable things for the game is seeing these characters grow and getting to know and love these characters. And without that, I feel like maybe the second game just wouldn't be as impactful. So it's a really tough thing. And I honestly don't know if I can recommend it, even though I've heard the second game is so good. Right now, I'm very hesitant, and I'd have to play the second game before I can make that kind of call. But if you did enjoy Trails in the Sky, and you loved the battle system, and you didn't mind the pacing of that game, I will say you will enjoy your time with this one. But for me, it reminded me of all the things I hated about that game. And I just wish it was more improved in a lot of the areas where Trails in the Sky lacked. But I will say there is quality here. It's not a terrible game or anything. I just wish I loved it as much as most people seem to. But anyways, that's it, guys. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.
You made it!
You've certainly got some good timing.
Seems like you're all okay, at least. I'm sorry we took so long.
You're here, and that's what counts.
So, a gargoyle.